One, I want to thank Moshe Katz for this opportunity, this event, this program is happening thanks to him. And he actually the one who introduced me to Raz and Via Sabra. So thank you so much, Moshe. I mean, it's been a pleasure just in the last few weeks to have this connection with Raz and Shirel. And I will start with introducing Raz, and she's working for a company called Via Sabra. And Via Sabra is Israel-based tour company that unfolds Israel through trips for groups, synagogues, and federations. Also do private tours for families. And in addition, they have affiliate company called Israel for All that is also only accessible tourism company in Israel. And here with us is Raz Rucker. I said it correctly, Rucker? Yes. I'm working on my accent. She's the contact manager for Via Sabra, also considers herself still part of the Milwaukee Jewish community family, and having lived and worked here for years. And Rose is delighted to join us today. And I would like Raz to introduce our speaker, Shirel. Raz, bevakasha.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone in Milwaukee. It's great to see so many familiar faces. And as Oria said, I'm part of Via Sabra. And to get Avi Sabari, who's the owner of the company, is on here too, but he's a little bit in the background. And we are very happy to partner with the Milwaukee Federation on this effort to bring Israel to you. Since you can't be in Israel right now, we're going to bring Israel to you. And we believe that encounters with the small gems of the country reveal a new way to experience the whole of Israel. Cheryl Horowitz, for us, is one of the gems. And she's one of our favorite partners and a superb teacher. Through drawing, sculpting, video, and sound, Shirel Horovitz's installations and performances explore the relationships between cities and communities. She earned her BFA from Bezalel Academy of Art and Design, her MA from the Interdisciplinary Art Program at Tel Aviv University, and has been studying and practicing Zen Buddhist inquiry meditation since 2006. Her works have been exhibited in museums and galleries across Israel and the US. And alongside her art practice, Shirel leads tours, lectures, and is an art consultant with a variety of organizations. Drawing from multiple fields of knowledge, Shirel weaves into each encounter aspects of social issues, politics, economy, and religion to create a vivid and nuanced image of the Israeli reality. And Shirel, please share with us.
Thank you, Raz. And thanks everyone for being here. Uriah was mentioning just before we started how excited he is. And it amazes me that time and time again, I get like these butterflies of meeting new people, even though it's on screen, and sharing this. So yeah, it's amazing to me that the word "I'm excited to be here," this sentence is actually still true, even when it's online. And basically what we'll be doing, this is a series, and this first session of ours is kind of, we could call it an introduction, but I sometimes think of it as a roller coaster ride through what Israeli art is. And I'll be talking for about 45 to 50 minutes, then we'll open it up for questions. For the duration of this time, you won't be seeing me full screen, but rather a lot of art, since that's what we're all about. I do want to ask if you have questions as we go along. We have this wonderful chat box. I won't be reading it as I go along, but it means you don't need to hold your question. You can just write it in the chat box and then I'll see it at the end. Or if Uriah or Raz, if you see there's a question that's like, you know, I should be interrupted for, please do that. And at the end, we'll have more time for questions. So we start here with the Bezalel emblem, and kind of I'm using this, the way we see it in Israel, kind of where do we mark the beginning of Israeli art, right? Do we think of it, do we go all the way back to Jewish art, or do we start at 1948 with the foundation of the state? Where does this even start? And actually, traditionally, we think of Israeli art as starting at the beginning of the 20th century. And the Bezalel Academy of Art and Design, the first Academy of Art in Israel, was founded in 1906. So way before the foundation of the state, we already have an art academy. And if you look at this emblem, you can see the word Bezalel. And if you know, I don't know how well acquainted you are with the Bible, but Bezalel is considered the first Jewish or the first biblical artist. Up to you if to call him an artist or a craftsman, but he basically is the one that got the instructions from God to build the Mishkan, the moving temple in the desert. And you can see in the emblem here, the two cherubs and the ark over here. And this is basically kind of the symbol until today of this school. Founded by Boris Schatz. I'll just say this is the only text I'm going to be sharing throughout this whole presentation. But I do want us to kind of see where it started, because we're going to go all the way until today and see the shifts and changes. When Boris Schatz founded this school, you can see, to train people in Jerusalem in crafts, consolidate original Jewish art and support Jewish artists, to find a visual expression much yearned for national and spiritual independence. And look at this, to create a synthesis between European artistic traditions and Jewish design tradition of Eastern Europe. So extremely Eurocentric, right? We're seeing here also mainly the word Jewish come up again and again and again, right? And craft. And actually, when we look at the beginning of what was coming out of the Bezalel school, we're seeing here a couple of examples. These silver works that nowadays we'd actually probably call them Judaica rather than fine arts, right? We wouldn't necessarily place them in the fine arts category. You can see here, they don't have an accurate date. Most of these works are assigned to the 1920s, and they're not signed by a specific person. An interesting thing to note that we'll meet later on in this talk is actually the silver work was done by Yemenite Jews that came to Israel at the time. So even though all of Boris Schatz's ideas and vision were Eurocentric, the people who knew the silver work and had the skills were Jews coming from Yemen with those silversmith skills. They were the ones doing the work. They were never accredited for them. And these are the things that are coming out of Bezalel school at that time. We're seeing here also a combination where you can already see kind of the merging of the Jewish and the Zionist, the Israeli. You're seeing the Jewish stars of David over here. And on the box, I'm guessing most of you already recognize Theodor Herzl, founding father of the Zionist movement, a box which could be, you know, anything from a box for etrog, we're coming up to Sukkot now, or a jewelry box, depending who's kind of picking to use it. So this is where we start, and I'm moving a little forward. We're looking here at a work by Reuven Rubin, 1923. And Reuven Rubin is considered, I'd say, the quintessential artist of that time and of a school of art that was called Askolat Eretz Israel, the Land of Israel School of Art. We're talking here about painters that come with tradition and education from other countries, right? They weren't studying yet in Israel. Most of them were studying in Europe. Paris was at that time the Mecca, the center of the art world. And this work, which is currently hanging in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, is a really good way to understand what was going on at the time, both in terms of painting and in terms of the way the Jewish immigrants were viewing what they met here in Israel. So it's a triptych. You can see 3 panels, even though this large central panel almost looks divided. It's a very sophisticated painterly action here, so it's not actually divided. Maybe this is a good moment to just say that alongside the many advantages of having an online lecture, because I can basically pull up works from different collections and we're skipping places. The thing is, we're seeing things all on our screen and not real size. And this is a very large work. So if you were viewing this, you'd be almost, the image would be almost real size, almost your size. So it has a huge impact. And if you look at the two side panels, you can see they're depicting local reality, Arab shepherds, right? We can see by the dress, the head covering, you can see here the sabra plant, right? And you can see the animals, and the people themselves are kind of almost shaped like the land. And we have Reuven Rubin, like many other artists coming at the time, completely fascinated by what he's seeing in this land. It's totally different from Europe, where he was coming from. And then in the central panel, we have almost two archetypical options of being a Jew in Israel at that time in a very extreme way. So we see here the couple, which we know are Jewish Yemenite based on the dress and the peot, the sideburns for the man, and the head covering and the dress. You see they're wearing very traditional clothing, have a child here, and if you look, the woman is holding a pomegranate in her hand. Now we'll see as we go along, and this is true in art in general, that artifacts that people hold or that are painted or photographed have meaning. And in this case, the pomegranate also pulls out our associations towards tradition, right? Pomegranate is one of the 7 species that the land of Israel was blessed by. It's mentioned in the Bible. So we have here a very traditional couple. Next to them, even though it's almost like there's an invisible line, we have a couple. He's bareback, she's bare-chested. And usually, just notice when we think of, if I go stereotypical, if we think of Jews depicted in paintings, and the easiest one is probably to think of Chagall, we're mainly seeing Jews dressed in black with long beards poring over the books, or in the case of Chagall, flying over the shtetl, right? But a very specific image. Here we're seeing something very, very different. Extremely, and I'd say this is Reuven Rubin depicting the new Jew, right? The worker of the land, not someone poring over the books, but rather someone out in the land. And if you look at the fruits, the watermelon, the bananas, and the oranges, they're all fruit that have nothing to do with religion or the Bible and have everything to do with the land itself. And in that way, we can kind of see almost the mindset of the Jewish immigration at the time, and the artists that are definitely part of this mindset. Another example by Nahum Guptman, another painter from that school of art, who, by the way, was also a pretty amazing author and won a lot of prizes for his children books. We can see this afternoon rest. If you know art history, you might be thinking of Gauguin at this point, and it's there's a reason. These artists were trained and were looking at the art of their time, so definitely influenced. Another thing you can see here very clearly, that it might not be correct anatomically, but it's almost like the figures are mimicking the land, right? He's trying to show this relationship between the people and the land, literally through the sculpting or the way he's painting these images. And you can see here again the watermelon, which will keep meeting as we go along. Some of them I'm just going to show for a moment. Tzionah Tajar, the Train in Neve Tzedek, and basically at this time we're seeing artists that are painting from observation. They're painting what they're seeing. With Tzionah Tajar, you can almost see here the beginning of Cubism and those influences, and that's what was happening at the time. We're skipping forward. And what we're seeing here on the screen is a sculpture. You're seeing basically the front and the two sides of this sculpture, which I'd say is one of the two most important sculptures we have in in the Israeli art world. And the sculpture is called Nimrod. You can see the dates. And if you look at the sculpture carefully, you can see again, it doesn't look Jewish in any typical way, right? If we look at the shape of the face, it might remind us of ancient Egyptians, definitely with the bird on his shoulder, right? And if you look carefully, he's holding behind his back something that looks like a weapon. And the biggest telltale, he's not circumcised. Okay, now this sculpture, when it first appeared, was so provocative that it wasn't exhibited for quite a while, even though now the pictures you're seeing here are taken from its, where it's exhibited as part of it's the entrance to the permanent collection of Israeli art in the Israel Museum. And why was it so provocative? Yitzhak Danziger, the sculptor, kind of associated himself with a group of artists that called themselves the Canaanites, basically saying that the reason the reason the Jewish people came back to the land at this point is not religious, it's not based on the word of God, but rather a historical relationship to the land. And so he creates this work which kind of does go back and resemble more archaeological connection to the land. And what makes it so provocative is actually the name Nimrod. Nimrod, before I give the literal meaning of the name, is actually a figure that is part of the Midrashim, the stories that are surrounding the biblical stories. And if you remember the story of the Babel Tower, where the Israelites built a tower to rebel against God, in the Midrashim, in the stories surrounding that story, the name of the person leading that rebellion is Nimrod. In Hebrew, Nimrod means we will rebel. It comes from the root mered, rebellion. That's why in Israel, for instance, if you meet anyone called Nimrod, you can be certain that they come from a secular family, probably from a kibbutz. No religious person will ever name their son after someone who rebelled against God. And you can see here in this sculpture a beginning of I'd say a split between the Jewish and the Israeli identity. And we kind of saw it before, but it's gonna grow and grow as we go along with the years. We're skipping forward, and yes, we're gonna be skipping decades, to this work by Yohanan Simon, Shabbat at the Kibbutz. So on the one hand, we have the Shabbat, right? We have the Sabbath, the seventh day, but it's in the kibbutz, and you can see we have here people riding the tractor. So it's definitely not a traditional Shabbat, traditional Jewish Shabbat. Another thing you might notice here, it might remind you of former Soviet Union propaganda or paintings, or Diego Rivera, if you know his works. Again, influences that are coming and that Israeli artists are working with. And then we get to the 1950s and a huge turn happens. I'm guessing that for some of you until now, you were like, oh, this is nice to look at, and then suddenly arrives at this, where it's much harder to say, okay, what am I looking at? We're looking at a painting by Yosef Zaritsky. And Yosef Zaritsky was one of a small group of friends, about 8 people, that said, okay, with all due respect to what was happening until now and painting what we're seeing and being part of this amazing story of the foundation of the state. Also notice we're in 1951, so the state at this point has been founded. We're artists, and we should be part of what's happening in the world. We need to talk art, not only the story of Israel. And what's happening in the world at that time is mainly abstract expressionism. The focus of the art world shifts from Paris to New York. The easiest way for you to realize you actually know this is if you think of Jackson Pollock. You probably heard his name. That's kind of the center of what's happening at that time. So abstract expressionism. And you can see here, Yosef Zalitsky, together with that group, call themselves New Horizon, and they start painting abstract. When I say abstract, you know, it's giving a huge term, but just we can think of it as painters that are saying, it's not about what we're drawing. A painting isn't about opening a window to a different world, but rather we want the viewer to look and experience color, composition, and paint. The medium itself becomes the center rather than the medium trying to be transparent in favor of something else. Yet, look at this, he still calls it Yechiam, life on the kibbutz. That's the kibbutz he was living in. And if you look carefully, you can see here some images in a tractor. You can kind of distinguish some kind of scenery in it. Now, at the same time, there's a huge split within the art world, because you see this is 1952, different artists, Naftali Bezem, in a work called To the Aid of the Seaman. Once again, if you know works by Diego Rivera, it's very hard not to think of him when you see this painting. And Naftali Bezem is actually painting here in direct connection to a strike that was happening in the Haifa, in the northern Israeli port of Haifa, by the seamen. And these two paintings kind of, I'd say, bring the two forces that were battling at the time. One was saying art needs to be connected to life. It needs to be about what's happening here. It's part of life. Whereas the other, if we go back to this, is saying art is about art is about art. And these two points of views are pretty extreme. And at that point in the 50s, the people who win on New Horizons, so much so, by the way, that people like Naftali Bezem, Yohanan Simon, and other artists that painted more in this style couldn't even exhibit, and many of them had to leave the country, sometimes until the end of their lives. And maybe I'll take it even more to the extreme. When I was studying, I wasn't taught about them at all. It's a new kind of, they made a comeback, and we'll slowly understand why. But New Horizons kind of took over and pushed the art world towards its abstract. One moment. Okay. So we're moving forward to 1967, in which the event, I'm guessing that for most of us, when I say 1967, it's connected to a very specific event, the 6-Day War. And at that point, the 6-Day War, 99.9% of Israeli population was euphoric. Really, 99.99999. Today, we might call it the 6-Day War, unifying Jerusalem, conquering Jerusalem, liberating Jerusalem, and we might have many different political opinions. But at that time, in 67, it was a 2,000-year-old dream coming true, and the country was euphoric. And Mordechai Ardon paints this huge, beautiful painting, which when you can come, just come and see it, because he's very, his texture is really important, and that doesn't come across on the screen. It's also a triptych, and you can see here the panels mark, ladder, and rock. The mark, you can see here the aleph. The text here is in Aramaic, and I'll just say that even on the painting, it's not legible. You can't really read it. You just see that it's Aramaic and Hebrew. And some of you might recognize this symbol as the tree of life from the Kabbalah, from the mystical Jewish tradition. Rock on this side, on the right side panel, symbolizes Even Ashtiyah, the rock on Mount Moriah, where according to Jewish tradition, mythology, is the center of the world, and the world was founded from there. And the ladders in the center, which I left that for the end, because so simply the connection between heaven and earth, from Jacob's ladder to just a day-to-day ladder that connects, and this unifying effect. And he really, through this painting, expresses a sentiment that was what was going on here, which makes the next slide even more jarring. I always feel I need to apologize for like taking you away from that beautiful painting to this work. but it's a crucial one to understand a lot of things. If you remember, I said about Nimrod, it's one of the two most important sculptures in Israeli art, and this is the second one. This is actually in the permanent collection in Tel Aviv Museum. We're skipping museums in this lecture, so time and space travel. And this work is by Yigal Tomarkin. It's real size, and the cost is based on the sculptor himself. And we can see here a soldier. We can recognize he's a soldier through the army boots, through the pilot goggles. But unlike the way we'd expect a soldier to be depicted, which is usually anything between dignified and heroic, we can see here not dignified, right? He's fully exposed. There are weapons protruding from his chest. His heart is a grenade and his stomach is a bomb. And it's a very disturbing, very harsh work. And the first thing I want you to notice is the year, 1967. How is that even possible, right? Because we said 99.999% of the population is euphoric at this point. And we see here kind of the beginning of the split between the art world and the Israeli Zionist narrative. And it has a few reasons. Remember what I said about the focus of the art world moving to the United States and to New York. And artists live between worlds. They kind of are constantly looking also what's happening over there. And in New York at that time and in America, what we have are protests against the Vietnam War. So the artists are placed here. Yigal Tomarkin, like the rest of the men, also fought in the wars. He was a soldier himself, but he's also experiencing this external look and this very external point of view. So, and we can see the sculpture is all about the horrors of war, which again, wasn't exhibited at the time it was made. It was too much. And the other thing about this is the title of this work, He Walked Through the Fields. We're not gonna go over all of this. I just wanted to mention, he took the title from a play by Moshe Shamir, one that any Israeli Jewish Israeli going through the school system, we had to learn this for our SATs. And this title of the play comes from an earlier poem by Natan Alterman. And it's basically talking, it's basically talking about the play about a young man named Uri that goes out to battle. It's a love affair between Uri, a young man in a kibbutz, and Mika, who's a Holocaust survivor. And then he goes to battle in the 1948 war, and he never comes back. So Yigal Tomarkin giving this work the name He Walked Through the Fields in a way also creates an identity for the soldier, because his name is Uri. Anyone who goes through the school system knows this, and he takes him out of obscurity or of some generalized idea of a soldier to something very specific. So we're moving forward, and I'm guessing that those of you that I had with the abstract painting and you were like, oh yeah, we can do that, are now looking at this and you're like, not sure I'd love to call this art, and that's okay. But what I want us to do is kind of figure out how this fits in the story and what happened, and how it's also telling us a larger story, not only of art and Israeli art, but also of what was happening here. And Israeli art, in many ways, the telltale is the date, okay? And you can see here 1975, so we're after 1973, the Yom Kippur War, a huge break or rift within Israeli society. The euphoria of 67 is long gone after 73. And Rafi Lavi, who is a major figure in the Israeli art world, basically says art needs to be connected to life, right? Remember what we said with the New Horizons, that they moved it aside. Here we start another shift. But it's not about beautifying it. It's not about giving the viewer an opportunity for a nice, fresh breath of air looking at some distant view, but it's rather putting reality as it is. And reality is broken, it's torn apart, it's confusing, and it needs contemplating. The other thing that he takes is also, what are the materials of Israeli art world? We're not in Italy. We don't have marble and gold, right? For those of you who visited here, we have plywood and ugly building facades. And we have many amazing things, but finesse isn't our strength. And Rafi Lavi said, he basically says, we're gonna use, Israeli art needs to be rooted in Israeli materials. And you can see here the plywood, the very crude paint. Some of you might have noticed Golda Meir in this work. Now, to understand a little more of this and actually how it reveals something very deep in the story of being Israeli, we're moving to a work by Tamar Geter, a student of Rafi Lavi, which is called Tel Chai Courtyard and the Ideal City. Tel Chai, for those of you who don't know, in north of Israel was a site of a very, very famous battle led by Yosef Trumpeldor. Again, we're like in an era where all history is re-examined, but the mythology that we grew up on about that battle was extremely heroic. Trumpeldor lost his life there. And the sentence that kind of remained from him and that I'm saying we, my generation, grew up with, was his sentence, Tov lamut be'ad artzenu. It is good to die for our country. So this extremely patriotic sentiment. And again, so the moment we see Tel Chai Courtyard, Tamar Geter is kind of directing us all the way to that myth. And then what is this ideal city? Because this work is a combination of painting and collage. This is actually paper stuck on the painting. It's derived from this painting, the ideal city. You can see here it's attributed, because there's such a long conversation in art history who made the painting. So at this point, the agreement is to mildly disagree. But this painting is considered not the ideal city as a city, but the ideal way to paint a city in perspective. Okay, so how would you paint a city? Now, just so we're clear on this, the eyesight can't do what we're seeing on this in this painting. This is not human eyesight, but this is considered the way to teach perspective and the way to draw perspective. So if we go back to this for a moment, what Tamar Geter is kind of putting forward for us is this question of who are we? Are we Israelis connected to this land, to the patriotism, dying for this land? Or are we artists and our tradition is deeply rooted in Europe, in the Renaissance, in this ideal city and the way it's painted? And how do these things even fit? How can I be Israeli and Jewish and an artist, and where do all of these things fit? And you can see how this painting has a very heavy feeling to it, and she's using this feeling also almost of a blackboard and chalk. And these are sentiments that are happening very much at that time. We're skipping a full decade forward to a work by David Rib, Green Line with Green Eyes, from 1987. So at this point, we're already deep inside the conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And maybe I'll just mention in brackets, I'm touching on huge things and I can call each of them something different. And I'm using the words right now so we can have kind of a level ground, but I think it's important to be aware that each of these words, you know, I can say the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, I can say the Jewish-Arab conflict, I can say many things. I'm putting that aside, not because what I'm saying is necessarily the truth, but because this is kind of my language to use at this point. And David Rib, you can see he's creating this section in the painting. What we have here are two sides. We have here very recognizable Tel Aviv with the beach, the sea, Kol Bo Shalom, and the Opera House, for those of you who might recognize. And on the other hand, we have, or in between, we have the map of Israel with the bites off it, right? Gaza and Judea and Samaria here. And again, it's different if I call it Judea and Samaria, or I call it the occupied territories or the liberated territories. Choose your terminology. Green, if you think of it, green line, on the one hand, it's a political phrase, but on the other hand, for painters, it's a color and a shape, right? And we have here people who are obviously Arab, Palestinian in the eyes, and we're seeing, I'd say, the first mention, or start to see at that point, first clearer mentions of the conflict also within Israeli art. And I don't know if you noticed, but until now, this lecture is called Israeli Art as a Window to blah, 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 blah. And I don't know if it struck you or not, but basically until now, everyone I was talking about is Jewish. And Israel is 80% Jewish and 20% non-Jews, with minorities from Muslims, Christian, Druze, Chilkaski, so different minorities. Where do we count them in the story of Israeli art? So that's a whole large question that I won't answer fully, but I do want to put it in as a question and insert a couple of artists that we'll see, just so that we remember that this question exists and is something to grapple with. Until today, the museums are grappling with it too. These are two works by Osama Boushakra, a very well-known, established Israeli-Palestinian artist, no longer alive. And if you look, he's painting the sabra plant, which for many of us is familiar as a Jewish symbol or an Israeli symbol for the sabra, for the sweet inside but prickly outside, but actually it's also a Palestinian symbol. And here he paints them uprooted from the ground and with unnatural light, right? Kind of lamenting the uprootedness of the Palestinian people from their land. If this reminds you a little of the sunflowers of Van Gogh gone completely astray, it's for a reason. We're skipping forward. I'm just checking the time. Okay, we're good on time. So I hope you're all okay. There's no like way for me to see what's going on with you. So hopefully you're with me and okay. We're getting here to 1995. If some of you might remember, 1995 was the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, the prime minister at that time leading the peace talks, the Oslo Accords, who, and at that time also the country was in a huge rift and chaos. Alongside the Accords, there were also many bombs, bus bombings. And on November 4th, 1995, at the end of a rally for peace in Tel Aviv, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish extremist, and a huge rift that we might say the consequences are visible until today happened at that time. And the art world also responds, and we can see here a work by David Ginton. It's pretty clear, this flag of Israel painted on a wooden panel. What's hard to see here is that what splits it is actually a real bullet in the painting. Jasper Jones has a painting that is split with a bowl, so it's kind of alluding to that, but also he gives it the name, and it's written here, Pilegesh Bagiva'ah, the Levites Concubine. We're not going to go into all the biblical story. It's a pretty gruesome one. If you're interested, you can look it up. But basically, I'll just say that over a very brutal rape and murder, the tribes of Israel were almost, we're at war, and we almost lost the unity of the people. So David Ginton is alluding to that story, to that rift within the tribes of Israel and to what's happening in that time. Another work by Adi Ness from 1996 from the series Soldiers that he created. And you can see already that artists are questioning and looking again at symbols that were once, I'd say, things that weren't really touched. You can see here again, the soldier is depicted in a way, kind of looking at himself, very vain, kind of not really looking out. I'll just say Adina's photographs are all staged. There's nothing natural about, he doesn't snap a shot, he stages them. But we see at that point that people are starting to really look deep at these central issues. And, okay, we're skipping another decade forward to 2005 to a work that was part of a huge exhibition all over the Helena Rubinstein Pavilion in Tel Aviv by artist Sigalit Landau. The name of this exhibition was the Hapitaron Ha'en Sofi, the unfinal or the endless solution, alluding actually to the final solution by Nazi Germany. And touching on themes of both our local mythologies and where is this world going. I must say it looks more and more relevant these days. And we once again encounter the watermelons, if you remember them from Reuven Rubin's work we started with, and then Nahum Guptman. So this extremely Israeli symbol fruit. This is all filmed in the Dead Sea. That's why they're floating. And you're seeing here the artist herself. What happens also is very interesting when you put watermelons in the Dead Sea or in any extreme salt water, it sucks out the liquid and then it becomes extremely, extremely, extremely sweet. That's just the chemical reaction. You can check it. And Sigalit Landau in this way is playing again with the cycle of life, with our place here, with the way we're treating the planet and ourselves. And this kind of, this exhibition was, I'd say also a mark of ambition and scale that also shifted the Israeli art world and the way kind of things happened here. Another work from that same year, which I think, to me, they're connected, or it sheds another light on this thing, is these are stills from a video called Treehouse Kit by Guy Benel. This is the artist here, and he grew out his beard to what you can see. He kind of looks like Theodor Herzl, the forefather of the Zionist movement. And in the video, we see him building this tree, which is actually all made of different IKEA parts. So these were supposed to be beds and chairs and stuff like that. But he builds this tree, then sits on it. But you can understand this already goes more to the question of, okay, there's the Zionist dream, but where are we now? And how is consumerism taking over and global life? And how do all of these things, if it all sit with this vision of who we are as a country? Now I'm going back in a way to the image of the Sabra with an artist named Michel Halak. Sorry, it's not written. This is an oil painting. And Mikhail Khalak is a Palestinian Christian Israeli. I know that sounds, what? But yes, and I make sure to use the identifying choices of the artist himself. Sorry. But we can see the difference between 1988 with the Sabra we saw by Assam Abu Shakra to this one with Michel Halak, which is, I'd say, much more provocative. There is nothing subtle about it. It's two men peeing on this bush, on this symbol. And another very interesting thing is we can't know if they're Jewish Israeli, are they Arabs, are they Palestinians? There's no way to know, but it's just this image of these two men pissing on this bush. We're skipping forward to 2015, and I'm going to show you a little bit of this video. It's not translated, so I'll leave the sound on for just a few moments, and then I'll close the sound and I'll explain what we're seeing.
אצלהם, לא כמו בארץ, שבעברית אומרים עוזרת בית, שזה נשמע עדין מאוד. העיראקים אמרו חדני, משרתת.
So this work by Vered Nissim from 2015 is, I'd say, nothing short than revolutionary. Vered Nissim actually just won a very major prize in Israel. This is exhibited in the museum and taught in schools. What we're seeing in this video is actually, this is the artist's mother cleaning on what looks like this huge sunflower that is made out of cleaning gloves. And what she's talking about is her life as a cleaner, making sure her daughter can get a better education than she is. Her daughter is on this ladder, and she's telling the story of her life coming from Iraq, a story that was mostly untold. And in this work and in her body of works, Vered Nissim was almost, I'd say, the first one to introduce into the Israeli art world in a very direct and clear way the relation between the socioeconomic status and the country of origin, the gap between Ashkenazi, Eurocentric Jews and Jews coming from Muslim countries. If we go all the way back to Boris Schatz and remember how Eurocentric it was and how the Yemenite artisans didn't even get the mentioning, she kind of brings that story to the front in a very provocative, in a very direct way. And you can see here, even by the title, if I tell you the story of my life, tears will run down from my eyes. Her parents appear in most of her video works and are very proud to be, in a way, a voice that was not heard until now. We can also see, I'd say, by this work, if we go back to New Horizons in 1950s and kind of, should art be part of life or should art just be about art, we can see the scales are shifting. So that's Vered's work. And we're looking at a time where, and there's a lot around 2015 in that area. I'm just keeping, okay, we're good on time. Where I'd say identity politics from the US started, lechalchel, my God, I lost the word. Started trickling into Israeli consciousness, and we start having stories of different groups of Israelis, rather than, if you think of the first works I showed, they were to the aid of the seaman, a soldier, the Jews. There were very large we stories, whereas we start from 2010 and onwards to see stories of specific communities, new voices coming up. This is a painting by Mirik Takeley, an Ethiopian artist. She's highly successful. I mean, there's no way of even, her works are at this point sold in advance all over the world. And you can see her work here, the stork. The stork in Jewish Ethiopian tradition is the bird that is the teller of calling the Jews back to Israel. Okay, and there are many Ethiopian hymns around the stork, so it's kind of the bearer of the good news, almost like if we think of Noah's Ark and the dove kind of telling us that story. So in Jewish Ethiopian tradition, the stork is the one to bear the good news of coming to Jerusalem and to Israel. If you look at this painting, you can see the two hands holding the stork, which is dead. A very harsh image, telling the story of the Ethiopian community and the break of this community as it came to Israel, kind of fulfilling the dream and then finding themselves disillusioned by what was happening here. Another, you know what, I want to do, I'll do this and I'll go back. Okay, I now realize I want to switch those works. So we'll talk about this for a moment. Another work is by Zoya Chilkaski Nandi. Another, I'd say at this point, the best-selling Israeli artist in the world, Israeli painter. She had her New York debut show last year, and it was just sold out and written all about in the New York Times. Pretty amazing. She grew up in the former Soviet Union. Like another million Jews, she came here in the 90s when she was about 12 or 13 years old. And this image, this painting, was actually the entrance painting to a huge show she had in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem called Pravda, which in Russian means truth. And kind of telling the story or being the voice of this immigration, this wave of immigration. And you can see here, it's people coming, kind of getting off the plane. And the name of this work, New Victims, actually comes from her sitting with her grandmother. And her grandmother, when she was watching TV with her and seeing more people coming from Russia, she would refer to them as the new victims. So you can imagine through this title and this style how blunt Zoya Chilkaski is, and she became in many ways a voice of this generation. And if you think, and I'll just go, if you think of these works, all of them are very much, in a way, bringing the bare truth in a very provocative way, in a very direct way, but also looking to uncover stories that were not necessarily told in the earlier days. These works by Tal Shohat, and I'll just say we have 3 more minutes before I open up for questions. These are photographs. And Tal Shohat is first generation in Israel. Like many, I mean, I am too, like many of my age. So her parents were born, specifically Tal, her parents are from Iran, Iranian Jews. She was born here. These are photographs, this pomegranate tree and olive tree. And if you look at them, it almost looks like Photoshop, right? It looks as if it's stuck on. It's not. What she does, she goes out to the tree itself at night. She places a backdrop. In this case, it's the carpet from her home. In this case, it's a black backdrop behind the tree. And then she puts lighting. So it causes this effect as if the tree is like popping out. She also, by the way, shines each of the fruit on the tree before she takes the photographs. The agricultural people don't like her because it ruins the fruit. Long story. But basically, you can see in this, she's touching on another question of many first generations, where on the one hand, we're not uprooted. We were born here. Our roots are here. But if we look backwards, what is our backdrop? Where do we come from? What type of void is it? What is the relationship between where we are and where we came from? So this last work I want to show you, I think, touches on a lot of the complexities of current relationship between Israelis and the land. And we're gonna see this video. It's like, we're gonna see 1.5 minutes, and then I'll talk about it, and then we'll open up for questions. So maybe what I'll do, I'll let it run while I'm explaining. This work by Ayelet Karmi and Merav Eiman is called Walking the Trail of Israel Without Treading on the Ground Even Once. The Trail of Israel is a marked trail going from north to south that people often walk. For instance, my younger brother did that in 2 months, just set out and walk. And in general, if you think of our tradition and Jewish tradition, walking the land is considered an intimate knowledge, right? God says to Abraham, Lech lecha, walk forth. through the land. Or even if you think now where you're able to walk, how intimate walking makes your connection to the land. And what they did in this crazy, crazy project, they were 50 people and they walked the trail, but not once physically stepped on the ground. And the reason I think this is extremely powerful, it's on the one hand, not letting go of this deep connection and love to the place, while on the other hand, fully acknowledging the challenge and the difficulty of what it is to be part of this place. And if you think of all the artworks we showed, so much of them have to do with, this is the installation, the way the video was installed in the Petah Tikva Museum. So much of the works have to do with this split identity, with this question of where do we belong? How does our story fit? How do we fit our ideals with the story? If we even think of this basics of being a Jewish and democratic state and how that in itself is such a huge conflict, I think this work captures that very deeply. So what I want to do is kind of open up for questions. I saw there were a few things on the chat here, so I'll just first peep at the chat to see. Adinas had an yes. I didn't know he had one at Milwaukee. Okay, okay. I don't know, someone wrote, this reminds me of South African artists who work in the same medium. I'm not sure which work, Hannah, which work you were referring to, so I'm not sure. But maybe what we'll do, William Kentridge, okay, yes. Yeah, actually there was a large installation by William Kentridge in the Tel Aviv Museum not too long ago, and yes, I can see why that could remind you of it. Okay, so maybe what I'll do is I'll stop the share so that I can see all of you, and if need be, I'll reshare and show you some stuff. But I do want to open up for questions. We're a small enough group, I think, for you to just like talk. But if you prefer a chat, that's fine. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear them.
I just want to say you can unmute yourself and ask any questions. Yes, George.
It appears that the artists in this democratic state of Israel have gone from being, shall we say, more pro-Jewish Israelis to more sympathetic, shall we say, towards the Palestinians' situation. Is that accurate or not accurate? And they have an absolute right to do so. I'm not being critical of that.
So I'm so happy you asked this question, and I'll answer it in a few folds, right? The first thing is I could do this whole lecture and talk about Israeli art and it will look totally different, right? At the end of the day, we need to pick and choose. And in a way, I'm curating a story for you that does have a specific kind of undercurrent to it. So it could look very different. However, the general sentiment, I'd say, and I'd put the Palestinian matter aside for a moment, especially if you think of Vered Nissim and all the later works that are looking at like Mizrahi Jews and Yemenite and Ethiopian. I think in general, the artists shifted from being very supportive of the state's story of its identity to taking a very personal, critical approach. And that includes almost any, I think anything we grew up on is questioned and re-questioned by the artists. And then that includes many different aspects, including the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Another layer of this is that I think in general, the art world tends to be liberal left. And those things are actually interestingly changing in Israel, and we're seeing more voices that are also contesting that. And another movement, which I didn't touch on here very much, is that alongside this, especially in the last few years, actually Jewish themes are re-emerging. You know, this is an introductory session in a way, and the next sessions, one of them is a painter that is touching all on these themes. So I think there are many stories to tell, and actually, to me, we're living at a very interesting time because it's critical towards everything, but it's allowing a lot of new things to emerge. And I'd say Jewishness as an identity is slowly resurfacing now too. So I hope that answers. And maybe just to strengthen, and thank you again for that answer, I'll give you an example. In all of this talk I just did, I didn't mention any works about the Holocaust, right? Which is really strange, really, really strange. I'll take it even one step further. If you go through the permanent Israeli collections in the Tel Aviv Museum and the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, you will, between not meeting the Holocaust at all or just having a very, very small indication to it. And that's also not true to the story, because we have a lot of artists that are dealing with it. And these stories, or the way we tell the story of what Israeli art is, changes with time. In the same way that we each curate our own story, right? If you're telling your life story to your grandchild or to your boss or to your friend, it sounds different, even though it's all you. And I think that's important to keep in mind, because any story you meet, take it with a grain of salt, notice what is missing and ask those questions. And that's true also to what I'm presenting, right? Because we all need to sift and pick and choose. So thank you for that question. It's very, very important. So I see Mosh is showing us a work from Bezalel School. That's pretty amazing. That's amazing that we get to see that. Thank you. It's quite rare these days.
What is it?
It's an artillery shell from 1914. It was actually done by Moises, who was considered one of the greatest teachers at Bezalel, and it's actually, the words on it is, the words in Hebrew are Zikaron mikibush Yerushalayim tarach. So Tafresh Ein Chet is the year that's done.
Which is really interesting, even the wording to translate. It's a memory of the conquering of Jerusalem, which today the word kibush as a terminology would, if you hear someone using that word, you can probably place them in the left. And we can see in that way how even the words change their meaning and shift throughout the years, together with, you know, our opinions that are molded around those words and shift each other. Any other questions?
Shirel, I have an idea for you. I just posted this to Raz, and I think Uriel, and we have to figure out how to do this, because this would be really awesome. I have a wonderful little collection of Israeli art, and I think it'd be great for us to do a actual physical tour of my home live, with you giving the definitions of what the different pieces are. Because there's a Zaritsky, there's some fun things. It would be really great to do that. And if we did it right, we can actually make it live-ish from people to actually walk through and see the art as we're doing it. We should consider doing something with that. It would be great fun. You're wonderful. If I haven't said this already, I miss you even more now, because I would love to have done this with you in person. For those of you who don't know, I've worked, Shirel and I did a tour of Israel together, where we started at the Tel Aviv Art Museum, and she finishes it doing Israeli pop art, literally graffiti art. And she's brilliant. She's wonderful. She's as sweet as she is here, she's even better in person. So soon again in Israel.
Thank you, Mosh. And yeah, we'll put an asterisk on that. Maybe, since I can't see there are any questions, maybe I'll just say about the next two in the series, Ulia. Is that okay?
Yeah, maybe just mention like about your work a little bit, about what the last thing that you have done, like your last exhibition, and before that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I get that a lot. Like after an hour and a half of showering people with information, they're like, and what do you do? And I'm like, oh. So I do installation and performance art, and I work in a variety of mediums. My latest exhibition just came down. It was in Durham, North Carolina. I was there for a month of a community project and exhibition that was all about mapping the relationship between the people and the city. It was supposed to go down on March 20th. I left Durham just before everything collapsed, and then the, the exhibition was up until now because the building was closed. And my latest thing, I just returned about a week ago from the desert, from Arad. It's a town in the south of Israel. They have a fascinating contemporary art center, and there's a residency program there. So I was there exploring my, I'd say, exploring my own mediums and creating a project that looks at how the life around us, especially in our homes, can become art, and what is needed for that to happen. So it was a fascinating two weeks, and it's a strange time to be an artist, to make stuff not knowing where it will go. I mean, it's a very strange, I guess, a strange time for all of us, especially now here with the extreme lockdown. Yeah, and I basically live in both the theory and the practice. So I'm very fortunate to play with both these worlds. Maybe I want to say about the next sessions. First of all, if you're in all of them, it definitely gives you, I think, an amazing depth and width, but they also each stand alone. They're not like dependent, and I build them like that on purpose. So they're not dependent one on another, but rather really stand alone. And the idea is that, okay, we've seen now this very general kind of story, but what happens when we dive into the art of one person? And we can see a body of work and how it grows and what are the issues that come up. So I chose for us two amazing artists. One of them, Hilla, Toony, Navok, actually just won the Rappaport Prize for Young Artists, which is basically the Israeli equivalent for Turner Prize in London or the Hugo Prize in New York. And if you're in the Guggenheim, if you're aware of those prizes. So it's the most prestigious Israeli prize. And in each of these talks, what we'll do, it will be first 40 minutes kind of buzzing through their work, seeing works, by the way, that they don't always even show these days, but kind of understanding the body of works. Then there'll be a conversation between me and the artist. So you get to kind of hear them in conversation, and then we'll open up for questions from you. So you'll be meeting the artists, but having first the basis of knowledge to ask questions and to engage. So yeah, those are the next two sessions, which I think it's, I think it also allows to understand what it is to be an artist. How does that all happen? What does it entail? Like, how does a body of work grow? And in that way, I'll just say the online is a huge plus. Like, it's the one thing which I'm like, oh, this medium works so much better because I get to also show you a life's work, and you get to meet the person, and a lot of things that can't really happen live in that way. I'm just seeing here. I was very stupid.
About Vered Nissim, Shirel and I were talking about Vered Nissim, about maybe also she'll be involved in one of those, right? In one of those conversations. And you told me the English was like the...
So yeah, there is an English barrier. So I make sure, you know, at the end of the day, I choose artists based. I think it's a combination. I want you to meet people who are clearly like imported within the Israeli art world, that have already marked their space, that their work comes across online in a vivid way, and that we can enjoy a conversation with them even though we're on screen. So it does create some limits, but again, each of these, you know, on the one hand, it's a limit, on the other hand, it's an opportunity. So those are our upcoming sessions, and I hope you'll join and invite friends to join too. Yeah, I think that's.
תודה רבה רבה.
I even left you 3 minutes, Ulia, to like.
תודה רבה, Shirel. I can't thank you enough. It was just, I mean, I thought I knew a little bit about Israeli art, but clear I didn't know a lot. So thank you so much. It was really so educator, and like I think we all learned so much today. And I hope everyone here will join us for the next 2 sessions. The next one is October 15th, the same time, 2 p.m. and October 29th, 2 p.m. I want to thank Raz and Via Sabra. I want to thank Moshe for making this opportunity happen. I just want to say, because a few people like privately asked me about like this session will now be available on Israel and Milwaukee Facebook page. While we were here on Zoom, there were about the same amount of people, about 20 people who were watching some, maybe not all of it, but most of it on Facebook, on Israel and Milwaukee Facebook page. And I know it's usually, 2 p.m. Some people actually work here in Milwaukee, so some people, are not able to join us live. But in my experience, like in the evening, there will be like much more people who can watch it on Facebook, and this session is also recorded. So if like some of you ask me where I can watch it again or where can I get it, please, you can email me and I'll send it to you as well. But it will be available for the next week or so. This session will be available. Toda rabba. Thank you so much, everyone. Raz, Moshe, you want to say something, Raz?
I'm
Thank you.
I love Shirel, and I am so pleased to be able to introduce her to Milwaukee.
Thank you, Raz.
Toda rabba lekulam. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Laila
you.
tov.
Laila tov. Have a good day.